They pulled me off the security patch 48 hours before the annual compliance audit. Not 49. Not a week. 48 hours. The product director called it a workflow optimization. I called it what it was, a decision made by someone who didn't understand the difference between vendor documentation and actual implementation. But I didn't say that out loud. I just nodded when he told me the news, standing in the hallway outside the conference room where the quarterly planning meeting had just wrapped. She trusts vendors more than you, he said. He smiled when he said it. Like it was a compliment to the vendors. Like trust was a currency you could spend without checking the balance. I'm Allison Reeves. I've been at Skytorch Technologies for 6 years. I started as a junior compliance analyst and worked my way up to senior security architect. My job is to make sure our systems don't leak data, don't violate regulations, and don't create liability. It's not glamorous. Most days it's reading logs, reviewing access controls, and asking questions nobody wants to answer. The security patch wasn't sexy work either. It was a routine update to our authentication layer, the kind of thing we did every quarter. But this one touched our customer data pipeline. That meant SOC 2 compliance. That meant the audit. The product director's name was Elliot Crane. He'd been with Skytorch for 18 months. He came from a startup that got acqui-hired by a mid-tier SaaS company, and he had opinions about everything. He thought compliance was bureaucracy. He thought security slowed down shipping. He thought vendors were plug-and-play solutions. His boss was the chief product officer, Vanessa Holt. Vanessa had been at Skytorch since the Series B. She was smart, fast, and absolutely convinced that speed was the only metric that mattered. She'd killed 3 compliance initiatives in the past year because they would have delayed feature releases. Legal didn't push back. They never did when Vanessa was in the room. Elliot told me Vanessa made the call. She reviewed the vendor documentation, he said. They've got SOC 2 Type 2 certification. They've done this 100 times. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I asked if she'd reviewed the integration requirements. He looked at me like I'd asked if she'd checked the weather. Allison, they're certified. That's what certification means. I didn't argue. You learn not to argue with people who think certification is a magic spell. The vendor was called SecureNest. They sold identity-as-a-service solutions. Their product was solid. Their implementation process was not. I'd worked with them on 2 previous projects, and both times we'd found gaps between what their documentation promised and what their API actually delivered. Small gaps. The kind of thing you catch in testing. But we weren't going to test. Elliot made that clear. They've got a dedicated success team, he said. They'll handle the integration. You can focus on other priorities. I asked what those priorities were. He didn't have an answer. That was Thursday afternoon. The audit was Monday morning. I went back to my desk and opened the SecureNest implementation guide. It was 87 pages long. Page 32 had a note about custom field mapping. Page 41 had a warning about legacy authentication modes. Page 63 had a troubleshooting section that mentioned session timeout mismatches. I flagged all 3 sections and sent them to Elliot. He replied in 4 minutes. Vendor will handle. Thanks. I saved the email. Friday morning I got a meeting invite from the SecureNest Customer Success Manager. Her name was Claire Osgood. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. The agenda said implementation kickoff. I wasn't invited. I checked the attendee list. Elliot. 2 engineers from the platform team. Nobody from compliance. Nobody from security. Nobody who'd ever read a SOC 2 control framework. I sent Elliot a Slack message. Should I join the SecureNest call? He replied immediately. No need. We've got it covered. I sent another message. Just want to make sure we're documenting the configuration for the audit. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Claire's team handles all documentation. That's part of their service. I closed Slack. I opened our audit tracker. The security patch was listed as a required control. The status was marked in progress. The owner was listed as me. I changed the owner to Elliot. He changed it back within an hour. I changed it again and added a comment, per Elliot Crane, vendor team is implementing. Allison Reeves removed from project by leadership. He deleted the comment. He didn't change the owner field. I took a screenshot. At 2:15 p.m. I walked past the conference room where the SecureNest call was happening. The door was closed but the glass wall wasn't frosted. I could see Elliot leaning back in his chair, smiling. One of the engineers was nodding. The other was typing on his laptop. Nobody was taking notes. I went back to my desk and opened the audit control spreadsheet. The security patch was tied to 3 controls, -12 Australian dollars, access enforcement. IA5, authenticator management. SC8, transmission confidentiality. All 3 required documented evidence of configuration review and testing. I checked the shared drive where we stored audit evidence. Nothing. I checked the SecureNest client portal where implementation artifacts were supposed to be uploaded. Nothing. I sent Elliot another Slack message. Where should I look for the implementation docs when auditors ask? He didn't reply. At 4:30 p.m. I got an email from our external auditor. Her name was Felicity Nguyen. She worked for Crenshaw & Associates, the firm we'd used for 3 years. The email was a reminder that the audit fieldwork would begin Monday at 9 a.m. She attached the evidence request list. Item 17, documentation of all security patches deployed in Q4, including configuration validation and testing records. I forwarded the email to Elliot. He replied at 5:47 p.m. Vendor will provide everything we need. I replied at 5:50 p.m. Do we have confirmation of that in writing? He replied at 5:51 p.m. Allison, you're not on this project anymore. I need you to let the team execute. I saved that email too. Friday night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the session timeout issue on page 63 of the implementation guide. SecureNest's default timeout was 30 minutes. Our policy required 15. If the vendor team didn't configure it correctly, every user session would violate our own controls. It was a small thing. Small things fail audits. Saturday morning I checked the SecureNest portal again. Still nothing. I checked our internal change management system. The security patch was scheduled to deploy Sunday at 11 p.m. No testing window. No validation checklist. No rollback plan. I drafted an email to Vanessa. I deleted it. I drafted another one to the Chief Information Security Officer, Gordon Travers. I deleted that one too. Gordon reported to Vanessa. He wasn't going to override her product director 2 days before a deployment. I did nothing. Sunday at 11:03 p.m. I got a Slack notification from the platform engineering channel. The security patch had deployed successfully. Someone posted a GIF of a rocket launching. Elliot reacted with a thumbs up emoji. Nobody posted logs. Nobody posted configuration screenshots. Nobody posted test results. I went to bed. Monday morning I arrived at the office at 8:15 a.m. Felicity was already in the small conference room we'd set up for the audit. She had her laptop open and 3 binders stacked next to her. She smiled when she saw me. Ready for another fun week? I smiled back. Always. At 9:02 a.m. Felicity sent me the first evidence request. Can you provide the configuration documentation for the Q4 authentication patch? I forwarded the request to Elliot. He replied at 9:17 a.m. Checking with vendor team. At 9:45 a.m. Felicity sent a follow-up. Also need testing records and sign-off logs. I forwarded it to Elliot. No reply. At 10:30 a.m. I walked to Elliot's office. He was on a call. I waited outside until he finished. He opened the door and looked annoyed. What's up? I showed him Felicity's requests on my phone. She needs the documentation for the security patch. He waved his hand. I already told Claire. She's pulling everything together. I asked when we'd have it. He checked his watch. Probably this afternoon. I asked if he'd seen any of the documentation yet. He looked at me like I was being difficult. Allison, I trust the vendor. That's why we hired them. I went back to my desk. At 11:15 a.m. I got a calendar invite from Elliot. The meeting was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. The subject line was Audit Support Sync. I accepted. At 11:32 a.m. I joined the call. Elliot was already there. So was Claire from SecureNest. Elliot started talking immediately. Claire, Felicity is asking for configuration docs and testing records. Can you send those over? Claire's camera was off but her voice was calm. We don't typically provide configuration details to third parties due to our security policies. There was a pause. Elliot laughed. Felicity's not a third party. She's our auditor. Claire's tone didn't change. I understand, but our standard practice is to provide a compliance attestation letter rather than raw configuration data. I unmuted. An attestation letter won't satisfy the control requirement. We need documented evidence of how the system is configured and validated. Claire responded immediately. We're SOC 2 Type 2 certified. That should be sufficient. I kept my voice level. Your certification covers your environment. It doesn't cover how your product is configured in our environment. Elliot jumped in. Allison, let's not get into the weeds here. Claire, can you just send us something that shows the system is set up correctly? Claire's voice was still calm. I can send our standard deployment summary. It won't have technical configuration details, but it confirms the deployment was successful. Elliot sounded relieved. Perfect. That works. I muted myself. The call ended at 11:51 a.m. At 12:03 p.m. Claire sent an email with a 2-page PDF attached. The document was titled SecureNest Deployment Summary. It had a logo at the top and a signature block at the bottom. The body of the document said, SecureNest Identity Platform was successfully deployed to SkyTorch Technologies on November 12. All standard configurations were applied according to best practices. No technical details. No validation steps. No evidence. I forwarded it to Felicity. She replied in 6 minutes. This doesn't meet the evidence requirement. I need to see the actual configuration settings and test results. I forwarded her response to Elliot. He replied immediately. Can you get on a call with Felicity and explain that the vendor handled everything? I replied immediately. She understands that. She still needs documented evidence. Elliot didn't reply. At 1:45 p.m. I was sitting in my cube when I heard shouting from the hallway. Elliot's voice. Why did we fail the audit? I looked up. He was standing in the entrance to my cube, red-faced, holding his phone. I kept my voice calm. We haven't failed the audit. Felicity just needs the documentation. He stepped closer. She's saying we have a critical finding. She's saying the security patch wasn't properly validated. I nodded. That's correct. He stared at me. What do you mean that's correct? I kept my tone neutral. We deployed the patch without testing it. We didn't document the configuration. We don't have evidence that it meets our control requirements. His face got redder. The vendor certified it. I stayed calm. The vendor certified their product. They didn't certify our implementation. He raised his voice. You're the security architect. You're supposed to make sure this stuff is handled. I looked at him. I was removed from the project. He blinked. What? I pulled up my email and turned my monitor toward him. Thursday afternoon. You told me Vanessa wanted the vendor team to handle everything. You said I should focus on other priorities. He looked at the screen. I didn't say you couldn't oversee it. I kept my voice level. You said I wasn't needed. You said the vendor would handle documentation. You told me to let the team execute. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. You should have escalated this. I tilted my head slightly. To whom? He didn't answer. He turned and walked away. At 2:30 p.m. I got a meeting invite from Vanessa. The subject line was audit issue. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. I accepted. At 3:01 p.m. I joined the conference room. Vanessa was already there. So was Elliot. So was Gordon Travers, the CISO. So was our general counsel, Helen Voss. Vanessa started talking immediately. Felicity is saying we have a critical finding on the security patch. I need to understand what happened. Elliot spoke before I could. The vendor was supposed to handle all the documentation. They sent us an attestation letter, but Felicity says it's not enough. Vanessa looked at me. Is that true? I nodded. The attestation letter doesn't contain technical evidence. We need configuration records and testing validation. Vanessa frowned. Why don't we have those? I kept my tone factual. The patch was deployed without internal testing or validation. The vendor team handled the implementation, but they don't provide detailed technical documentation to clients. Vanessa's frown deepened. Who made the decision to skip testing? Elliot shifted in his chair. We relied on the vendor's expertise. They're certified. Gordon spoke for the first time. Certification doesn't replace our validation process. Vanessa looked at Elliot. Did you know we needed to test this internally? Elliot hesitated. I thought the vendor certification covered it. Vanessa turned to me. Did you raise any concerns about this approach? I nodded. Yes. On Thursday, I sent Elliot 3 sections from the vendor's implementation guide that flagged potential configuration issues. I asked about testing and documentation. I was told the vendor would handle everything. Vanessa's expression didn't change. Do you have those communications? I nodded again. Yes. Helen, the general counsel, spoke up. Can you forward those to me? I pulled out my phone and forwarded the entire email thread while sitting in the meeting. Helen's phone buzzed. She opened the email and started reading. The room was silent for 40 seconds. Helen looked up at Vanessa. Allison flagged the risks on Thursday. Elliot removed her from the project and told her the vendor would handle documentation. Vanessa looked at Elliot. He started to speak, but Vanessa held up her hand. Not now. She turned to Gordon. What do we need to do to fix this? Gordon glanced at me, then back at Vanessa. We need to validate the configuration, document everything, and provide evidence to Felicity. That will take at least 2 days. Vanessa's jaw tightened. That delays the audit. Gordon nodded. Yes. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me. Can you handle the validation and documentation? I met her eyes. Yes. She nodded once. Do it. Elliot will support you with whatever you need. I didn't look at Elliot. Understood. The meeting ended at 3:34 p.m. I went back to my desk and opened the SecureNest admin portal. I logged in using the emergency access credentials we kept for vendor systems. I spent the next 6 hours reviewing every configuration setting. The session timeout was set to 30 minutes. Our policy required 15. The password complexity requirements were set to medium. Our policy required high. The multi-factor authentication was set to optional for internal users. Our policy required it for everyone. 3 violations. 3 control failures. I documented everything in a spreadsheet with screenshots and timestamps. At 9:47 p.m. I reconfigured all 3 settings to match our policy. At 10:15 p.m. I ran a test authentication flow and captured the logs. At 10:52 p.m. I compiled everything into a validation report with an evidence appendix. At 11:08 p.m. I sent the report to Felicity, Gordon, and Helen. I did not copy Elliot or Vanessa. Tuesday morning at 8:03 a.m. Felicity replied. This is exactly what I needed. The finding is resolved. At 8:47 a.m. Gordon forwarded Felicity's email to Vanessa with a note, issue closed. Allison handled it. At 9:12 a.m. Vanessa replied to Gordon. Good. Let's debrief on Thursday. At 10:30 a.m. Elliot sent me a Slack message. Can we talk? I replied. I'm heads down on audit work. Maybe later this week. He didn't reply. Thursday at 2 p.m. I joined the debrief meeting. Vanessa, Gordon, Helen, and Elliot were there. Vanessa started by thanking me for resolving the audit issue. Then she turned to Elliot. I want to understand what went wrong. Elliot explained his reasoning. He said he trusted the vendor. He said he thought their certification meant we didn't need internal validation. He said he was trying to move fast. Vanessa listened without interrupting. When Elliot finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Speed doesn't matter if we fail the audit." Elliot nodded. Vanessa continued. "Going forward, all security-related deployments require sign-off from Allison or Gordon. No exceptions." Elliot nodded again. Vanessa looked at me. "Anything you need from leadership to prevent this in the future?" I kept my voice calm. "Clear escalation paths. If someone disagrees with a security recommendation, I need to know who makes the final call." Vanessa nodded. "That's fair. Default is you and Gordon make the call unless I personally override it. And if I override it, I'll document why." I nodded. The meeting ended at 2:41 p.m. I went back to my desk. At 4:15 p.m. I got an email from Helen. The subject line was Documentation Standards. The email said, "Going forward, all vendor engagements that touch compliance-related systems require a signed agreement specifying documentation deliverables. I'll be adding this to our standard contract template. Thanks for flagging the gap." I replied. "Happy to help." At 5:30 p.m. I packed up my laptop and walked to the parking garage. On the drive home I thought about the phrase Elliot used on Thursday. "She trusts vendors more than you." It wasn't about trust. It was about understanding the difference between a vendor's responsibility and our responsibility. Vendors sell products. They don't own your compliance. Certification means they've met a standard in their environment. It doesn't mean their product is configured correctly in yours. Speed matters. But speed without validation is just recklessness with a deadline. I stopped at a red light and checked my phone. There was a Slack message from Gordon. "Nice work this week. Let me know if you need anything." I replied. "All good. Thanks." The light turned green. I drove home. 3 weeks later the audit report came back. Clean opinion. No findings. Felicity sent a note thanking the team for their cooperation. Vanessa forwarded it to the entire company with a celebratory message. Elliot didn't reply to the thread. A month after that, Vanessa announced a new policy. All product releases that touched customer data or authentication systems required a security review before deployment. The policy was written by Gordon. I helped draft the implementation checklist. Elliot wasn't involved in the process. He stopped scheduling meetings with me. When we passed in the hallway, he nodded but didn't speak. I didn't mind. In February, Elliot accepted a role at another company. His last day was the 15th. Vanessa sent a goodbye email thanking him for his contributions. I didn't attend his farewell lunch. I had a vendor call scheduled. In March, Vanessa asked me to present at the quarterly leadership meeting. The topic was lessons from the Q4 audit. I built a slide deck with 3 main points. 1. Vendor certification is not the same as implementation validation. 2. Speed is only valuable if it doesn't create risk. 3. Documentation is not bureaucracy. It's evidence that you did what you said you'd do. The presentation was 18 minutes long. When I finished, the CFO asked a question. "How do we make sure this doesn't happen again?" I answered. "Make security part of the definition of done. If it's not validated, it's not shipped." Vanessa nodded. "Let's make that a policy." 2 weeks later it was. In April I got a performance review. Gordon rated me exceeds expectations in every category. The summary said, "Allison consistently demonstrates technical excellence and professional judgment under pressure. Her handling of the Q4 audit issue exemplified the kind of ownership and problem-solving we value at SkyTorch." I saved the review in a folder on my desktop. In May, SecureNest reached out to renew their contract. The procurement team forwarded the request to me for technical review. I reviewed the contract. I noted that the documentation deliverables were vague. I sent the contract to Helen with my notes. Helen revised the contract to require specific technical artifacts for every implementation. SecureNest pushed back. Helen held firm. SecureNest agreed to the new terms. We renewed the contract. In June I was invited to join a working group on vendor risk management. The group was chartered by Helen and sponsored by Vanessa. The goal was to create a framework for evaluating and managing third-party vendors. I co-led the technical workstream. We published the framework in September. It included mandatory validation requirements for any vendor touching compliance-sensitive systems. It included documentation standards. It included escalation procedures. Vanessa approved it without changes. It became company policy in October. I still think about that Thursday afternoon in November. 48 hours before the audit. Elliot standing in the hallway, smiling. She trusts vendors more than you. He thought trust was a shortcut. He thought certification was a guarantee. He thought speed mattered more than correctness. He was wrong on all 3 counts. But I didn't argue with him in the moment. I documented everything. I waited. I let the system reveal the truth. When the crisis came, I had the receipts. When the question was asked, I had the answer. When the failure was undeniable, I had the fix. That's not revenge. That's patience. That's process. That's knowing the difference between being right in the hallway and being right in the audit room. Elliot wanted speed. Vanessa wanted results. I gave them both. But I did it the right way. With documentation. With validation. With evidence. The audit passed because I knew how to do my job. The policy changed because I knew how to make my case. The vendor contract improved because I knew which battles to fight. None of that required drama. None of that required confrontation. It just required doing the work. And keeping the receipts. Back at SkyTorch, the changes we implemented started showing results. In September, the platform team wanted to deploy a new analytics vendor called Datapulse. The product manager leading the initiative was named Colin Fitzroy. Colin scheduled a kickoff meeting and invited me. I reviewed the vendor documentation before the call. On page 41 of their integration guide, I found a note about data residency. Datapulse stored all analytics data in a US-based cloud region by default. But their enterprise tier allowed custom region selection. Our customer contracts required that European customer data stay in EU regions. I flagged it in the meeting. Colin nodded. Good catch. I'll make sure we configure it correctly. 2 days later, he sent me a draft configuration document. It specified EU region storage for all European customer data. It included step-by-step validation procedures. I reviewed it and sent back 3 minor corrections. Colin incorporated them and sent the final version to the vendor. The deployment happened 2 weeks later. No surprises. No audit findings. No crisis. Colin sent me a thank you message afterward. Appreciate you keeping us out of trouble. I replied. That's the job. The culture was changing. Security wasn't an afterthought anymore. It was part of the process. People asked questions earlier. They shared documentation proactively. They built in time for validation. Not because they were forced to. Because they understood why it mattered. In December, Gordon called me into his office. He closed the door. Vanessa wants to create a dedicated vendor security team. She's asking if you want to lead it. I sat down. What's the scope? Gordon leaned back in his chair. All third-party risk. Vendor assessments, contract reviews, ongoing monitoring. You'd build the team from scratch. I asked if I'd still report to him. He nodded. Yes. But you'd have direct access to Vanessa for strategic decisions. I looked at Gordon. I'll do it. He smiled. Good. I told Vanessa you would. The official announcement went out in January. By March, the team was operational. We built a vendor intake process. Every new vendor went through a standardized assessment. We created a risk scoring model based on data access, compliance scope, and integration complexity. The process added 5 days to vendor evaluations. Some product managers complained. Colin wasn't one of them. 5 days up front is better than 5 weeks of rework, he told another PM in a meeting I overheard. In April, we conducted our second annual audit since the crisis. Felicity reviewed our vendor management program. She spent 3 hours going through our assessment templates, contract standards, and monitoring dashboards. At the end of the review, she looked at me. This is best in class. I'm going to use your framework as a reference for other clients. In July, Vanessa asked me to present the vendor program at the board meeting. I built a 12-slide deck. Executive summary. Key metrics. Risk reduction. Cost avoidance. The board meeting was on a Thursday morning. I presented for 15 minutes. One board member, a former CFO named Roland Kemp, asked about ROI. How do we measure the value of this program? I had the answer ready. We track 3 metrics. Audit findings eliminated. High-risk vendor integrations blocked. Contract efficiency improved by 60%. Roland looked at Vanessa. This is a good investment. After the meeting, Vanessa pulled me aside. The board was impressed. I thanked her. In August, I took a week off. My first real vacation in 2 years. I went to the coast and thought about impact. The vendor management program worked because it was built on verification over trust. When I returned, I scheduled a meeting with Vanessa. I told her I wanted to expand the scope. Not just vendors. Any third party that touched our systems. She asked what that would require. 2 more team members. Expanded monitoring tools. 6 months to build it. She nodded. Write up a proposal. The executive team approved it in October. In January, we prevented a data breach. A contracting firm we used for customer support had been compromised. Their systems were infected with credential stealing malware. We caught it because of our continuous monitoring program. We detected unusual login patterns from their network. We immediately revoked their access and launched an investigation. The breach never touched our production systems. Our customers never knew there was a threat. The incident response cost us 40 hours of work and some awkward conversations with the contracting firm. A breach would have cost us our reputation. Vanessa sent an email to the entire company praising the security team's work. She specifically mentioned the third-party monitoring program. She didn't mention my name. She didn't need to. The people who mattered knew. In February, I got promoted to principal security architect. Gordon announced it in the company all-hands. Vanessa sent me a congratulations email. I replied. Thank you. Looking forward to continuing the work. I meant it. Security isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most thorough. It's about knowing that systems only work if people follow them. And it's about understanding that trust without verification isn't trust. It's just hope. And hope doesn't pass audits. I still think about Elliot sometimes. About that moment in the hallway when he told me Vanessa trusted vendors more than me. He thought he was delivering bad news. He thought he was putting me in my place. He didn't realize he was handing me a gift. Because when the system failed, I wasn't responsible for the failure. I was ready with the solution. That's the power of documentation. That's the power of patience. That's the power of knowing that the truth always comes out eventually. You just have to be there when it does. With the receipts. With the process. With the proof. The security patch that started everything is still running. I check it every quarter during our compliance reviews. It's configured correctly now. 15-minute session timeout. High password complexity. Mandatory multi-factor authentication. Exactly the way it should have been from the beginning. The configuration hasn't changed since that night I fixed it. But everything else has. The culture. The process. The accountability. That's what happens when you turn a crisis into a framework. When you turn a failure into a standard. When you turn revenge into patience. And patience into policy.